Welcome, Dale Tuggy, to Restitutio. So glad to have you today on the show.
Thanks for having me, Sean. It's a privilege.
Glad you're here. Like to have some Dale Tuggy time occasionally, at least once a year. And last year we had launched the UCA, the Unitarian Christian Alliance, and we did that whole episode introducing the organization. I know that there are always new listeners coming to Restitutio, so maybe you could just briefly tell us about the UCA and the purpose of the UCA, just to get started here.
Sure, Sean. The mission of the UCA is to network, encourage, and educate Unitarian Christian individuals and groups, and to advance the cause of a Unitarian Christian understanding of God and his unique Son. So it's not a church, it's not a denomination. It's basically a parachurch ministry whose mission it is to serve individuals and Unitarian Christian groups, help them to advance the kingdom.
Yep. I actually remember our initial conversation about the UCA when it was just a concept. We were having burgers at the Atlanta airport. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And you were talking about the need for this organization just to help people unite together from different groups and different churches and denominations to have a stronger voice together than what we would have separately. So it's exciting to me to be part of it from the ground level here. What do you think about over the last year? I mean, this UCA is still brand spanking new, wouldn't you say? Has it been what you expected?
Yeah, I mean, we're up into, I don't know how many hundreds now. We've got people in, more than 24 countries, I think. And I think the growth is slow and steady. I see new emails come in every other day where somebody has joined up and become a member. And, we know there are a lot more Unitarian Christians than are represented even in our list. I may know that there's a Church of God General Conference church in this town and they got 50 or 60 people there, but we have one member. Or there might be a family with 5 people and we have one member. But we're really pleased with how it's going so far. And we all love this map feature that we've had implemented on our site where you can just look at the globe and you can see these orange dots where all our members are. And that's just incredibly encouraging, and I think we're still in the early stages of it. I think, in a couple of years, maybe we'll have 5 or 10 times the members, and we'll really be able to be helpful to people in just about any, medium-sized city in terms of helping people find fellowship, helping them find a church or a ministry or an online fellowship. So it's going well. And I think people are starting to understand kind of where we fit in, that we're not in competition with the denominations and the churches, but we're just trying to, add fuel to the fire, basically, to help give them a neutral place where they can influence each other and have a wider influence, and where seekers, eventually can find them. There's all kinds of people finding your materials or mine or work from 21st century Reformation, places like that, Kegan, Chandler's books. And then they're like, okay, great. Now where do we go to church? Mm-hmm. And, we're trying to build that network with enough different kinds of churches where different kinds of people can find a landing place.
Yeah. What are you excited about the UCA? As far as like where things are at now and where we're headed?
Well, a couple of things in particular at the moment. One, I'm just absolutely delighted with the UCA podcast, which is produced by board member Mark Kane. I think it's fantastic. It's encouraging and very interesting to hear all these different stories from different sorts of people. I think it's really building a sense of community and a sense of sympathy, for the struggles that people have to go through as they are trying to figure these things out, as they're trying to be faithful to God in their spiritual journey. So I absolutely love that. I'm also right now really excited about the conference. And, as I mentioned, we're not a denomination or church, but we're just trying to, help them, basically enable them in their mission. So I'm really pleased to say that for this conference coming up, we've got a number of groups that have chosen to become conference partners. So they've made a contribution. They'll have a table at the conference where they can meet people and explain to people all the amazing things that they're doing. And then that money, really offsets the cost for everybody else of the conference and allows us to give some financial aid to people, basically. And just the range of groups is really encouraging to me. I mean, I don't know where else you go to find this mix of people, in one room. And if you're a seeker, I don't know where else you go to be exposed to, this variety of Unitarian Christian ministries. So we have Atlanta Bible College, which is run by the Church of God General Conference, which is my denomination. We've got Allegiance to the King. We've got Williamsburg Christadelphian Foundation, which looks very interesting. Spirit and Truth. A lot of people know them as the maker of, biblicalunitarian.com. They do lots of things. Living Hope International Ministries.
Oh, yeah.
And one that I hadn't known about before called integritysyndicate.com.
What's that? I haven't heard of that either.
It's a smaller, just, biblical Unitarian ministry that has a very well done website, and they're somewhere in the Midwest. And I haven't had a chance to meet them yet. I've just interacted with them a little bit online about the conference and looked at their website and thought, oh, that looks really cool. And so we're really glad to have them be a part of it. So, I'm looking forward to just the kind of mutual encouragement, maybe in some sense cross-pollination that will come about. And again, just helping Unitarian Christians have somewhere to land. As this message gets out more, we're getting people who used to be Jehovah's Witnesses or used to be Oneness Pentecostals, or who used to be Trinitarians. And, I can't imagine they're all going to agree about all the different things that divide different Unitarian groups. And so, we want them to find their home. And, we don't tell groups what's important. We don't tell them what they should consider essential, who they should fellowship with. We have zero control. We're just enablers. We're cheerleaders, and we would much rather see people find fellowship and a further walk with Christ in some group that, maybe we slightly disagree with as individuals, rather than becoming agnostics or atheists. We're just kind of wandering in the wilderness, which is really not a good place to be as far as your spiritual life. So anyway, I'm really excited about just that conglomeration of people and ministries coming together.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, I'm super excited about it too. And I think this conference is really just going to be epic and historic, because we haven't had a conference last year. COVID canceled it. This year, COVID is somewhat impeding us from meeting in the way that we would want to meet, just totally carefree. We have some social distancing and some other precautions in place for the event. But at least we can still have it, at least as things are right now. Hopefully we can continue to have it. And, a bunch of people have already signed up, and hopefully more will continue to sign up. So I'm definitely excited about it too. I'd like to switch gears just for a minute here and talk about this book right here, Thomas Emlyn, and Humble Inquiry into the Scripture Account of Jesus Christ. Why is this book, do you think, worth resurrecting and publishing for today?
Well, I read this book years ago, probably in the early 2000s, and I thought it was really extraordinary, and I thought his story was really extraordinary. I even ended up reprinting volume 1 of his complete works from 1746 at one point. And I think what's extraordinary about the book are, first of all, his arguments, and second of all, his example. His example, he was a lot like our friend Jeff Dybel in Australia. He was this minister who was a good preacher, who loved people, and the people loved him. And then he started to actually think about these Trinity and incarnation issues, and realized that, hey, the New Testament doesn't support Trinitarian traditions. but he kind of wanted to keep it on the down low. He's instinctively against controversy and denouncing and grandstanding and all the nonsense that goes on. And so he kind of kept his views on the down low for a while and just preached on practical topics. But then, of course, it eventually came out. He was rudely, roughly, nastily forced out of his job and had to flee the country. He went from Ireland back to England to kind of let the controversy die down. But eventually he was persuaded to, okay, you need to step up and just lay it on the line, explain why it is you think what you think. And so he did that in his book, An Humble Inquiry. And it's just a great book, and it has a lot of interesting insights on different topics. For instance, the current exalted state that Jesus enjoys now, and how he must have a high degree of knowledge and power right now to be able to carry out his role as head of the church, or how Unitarian Trinitarian arguments relate to Protestant Catholic arguments. That's another interesting thing that he goes into, and he's just very very plain spoken, very careful in his reasoning. There's no kind of grandstanding, like he's not interested in condemning everybody else, but he is interested in the end in sticking up for truth and for, trying to be a faithful servant of God and of Jesus, and to, explain what he thinks the New Testament actually teaches. So it's just a really neat little book. Historically, it had a big influence in encouraging the cause of religious tolerance, because he went to jail for writing this book. And a lot of people, whether Unitarian or Trinitarian or just agnostics, were like, wait a second, do we really want to throw this guy in jail under blasphemy laws? This guy's never blasphemed a day in his life. Even if he had, do we throw people in jail for that? And so, thank God, people like Jeff Dybel in Australia don't get thrown in jail,
right,
for thinking that the one true God is the Father. But that happened to Thomas Emlyn. And his example throughout is just very godly and Christ-like. And it did prick the consciences of people at the time. He was a well-known person in Unitarian Christianity, especially in England and America in the 1800s. He's been forgotten, but there's not a good reason for it. He's really a neat part of our heritage as Unitarian Christians.
Mm-hmm. This book is fairly short as well, which I think is good for these kinds of books.
Absolutely,
we have some big ones already, some booster size books out there, and I think you're still working on your big book, right? Is that something you?
My big Trinity book that it's been
one day going to publish.
Been writing for 10 years.
Well, I won't hold you to it, but
who knows when that'll see the light of day.
Yeah. Yeah, you've got this beautiful introduction by Kegan Chandler. What is that? 34 pages, 32 pages. And then we've got the title page from the original that's introducing the work of Thomas Emlyn. And you guys have updated the language. So we're not dealing with 17th, early 18th century English, which for many of us is just pretty difficult to wade through.
Yeah, that's right. It's just too hard to read, especially just for an average person, or even a person with a university degree. It's still very hard to read. So Kegan Chandler and I went through every single sentence of it and just made it up to modern standards. If a word didn't mean the same thing anymore, we would go and find a better word that you would understand. So I like it. I mean, I was used to reading stuff from that era. I was like, oh, this is pretty easy. It's very plain spoken. But then when you realize, oh, wait a second, but it's in the English of 1702. That's if we're going to have people read this, it needs to be in their language. Yeah. So that's what we did.
Yeah. The book is full of these really nice, elaborate footnotes. Could you talk about that a little bit? Were these original to the author, or you guys added these in as the editors?
Let's see. The scripture references were mostly from the Complete Works, Volume 1 of Emlyn's writings that was put together by his son. I think if I remember right, it was 1746. So the scripture references are almost all his. Most of the other references are ours. And we just felt like we could add some value by chasing down some of these now obscure historical sources that he's mentioning. He's mentioning some very interesting people. He's frequently drawing some points from other non-Calvinist Protestants, and occasionally even from the Calvinist ones. So it brought out the history nerd in both Kegan and I.
Yeah.
And so yeah, we thought we could add some value to it that way. He actually, even though he's very plain spoken, he'll make very deep points about, you know, why two natures incarnation theory really doesn't help anything. And sometimes a little footnote just really helps you to see the sting of it.
Yeah.
He's really a very thoughtful and smart person. Not a high class, you know, theologian professor type, but a very, you know, somebody who's just packed with common sense and who really takes scripture seriously.
Yeah. I appreciated this statement on page 48. Our adversaries will gain nothing by proof texts in which the title of God is given to Christ. Boy, that just sounds so relevant. You hear about that today, where somebody will go to Romans 9:5 or Titus 2:13 or even John 20:28 and say, oh, look, the New Testament applies the word God to Christ. And then Emlin goes on and says, since that may be, and yet it will not prove him to be the supreme and independent God, but only one who is inhabited and commissioned and enabled by him who is so. And that's our classic argument for agency, that Jesus represents God. And therefore, you know, if he is called God, that doesn't mean he's the supreme God. You know, that's a very important distinction. And I tell you, I've heard Trinitarian apologists falsely accuse myself and others of inventing this new way of thinking about who Jesus is, and that this is ad hoc and just you know, a non-convincing, unconvincing defense. And yet here we have it, 1702, right? And you know, it's not like he was really innovating either. We have the Socinians before him in the 1500s as well. So
yeah, that's right. And he had read
there.
some of the controversial literature from the 1690s amongst different kinds of Trinitarians and Unitarians. And he wasn't a patristics nerd himself, but at some point he did meet and no doubt discuss all of these things with Sir Isaac Newton. Yes, that Isaac Newton, who was into patristics and who held similar views about the word God and how that functions. And also the well-known intellectual Samuel Clarke. So they were all in London at the same time. I'm not sure how much he interacted with them before that book, but certainly after that book was published, he would have known both of those. And he would have been told that, you know, the view that the one true God just is the Father alone. Is Jesus divine? Well, maybe in some sense, but not the same sense that the one true God is divine. They would have told him that, yeah, that was a common patristic view before, you know, basically 381 and after.
Yeah. What sort of audience would you say this book is best meant for?
I mean, I think it's really great for Unitarian Christians, to just for the light it sheds on the New Testament, and for this just, you know, godly example of, you know, just confessing truth despite the consequences and doing it in a Christ-like fashion. So I think it's maybe best for that person, but I think even for a person who doesn't quite know what they think about all of this, like I said, it's so carefully reasoned and plain spoken. I think you'll find a lot of food for thought in this book. So if you think it's obvious that, hey, obviously Jesus is divine in the fullest possible sense, I think if you read this book, you'll come away thinking, well, that's not right, because he kind of systematically goes after it, and he shows that the biblical authors portray Jesus as having limitations, and they just don't ever give you any warning about thinking, well, these limitations only pertain to his human nature, but they don't pertain to his divine nature and things like that. So I mean, like you said, it's a short book, so it's not like you're going to get bogged down and quit halfway through. It's really a very engaging book, I think, the way it moves along.
Okay. And how can people get a copy of it?
It's published on Amazon, which happily is available in very many countries now. So I'm sure you can get it in the EU, in Australia. I think you can get it in Japan and India. Obviously, in America, Canada, Mexico, and there's a electronic version too if you're an ebook person.
Very good. And this is published by the Unitarian Christian Alliance under its imprint, Theophilus Press, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So talk to us a little bit about Theophilus Press and what the vision is there, and a little bit about what is next for Theophilus Press.
The vision of it is to be able to put out books that are the same quality as an academic press would put out, like the University of Chicago Press or Oxford University Press or Cambridge University Press. So we're shooting for a really high level of editing and for a really high level of content. And we have plenty of Unitarian books out there, particularly what I call whistleblower books. And there's lots of good ones. It's just a Bible-oriented Christian. Typically, they start out Trinitarian, then they do a thorough investigation over many years, and they're like, "Hey guys, the Trinity's not in the Bible. Guess what?" And unfortunately, it's easy for academic types to just blow this off because they make this value judgment, based on how the book looks or what the name on the press is. This is a modern phenomenon. In Emlin's day, if you wrote a book, you then paid the printer to print it. This idea of publishers adding prestige to books, and the assumption that a book is no good unless it's come from a big publisher. These are very modern developments, late 1800s to the present. So we're trying to publish books that PhDs and PhD students will look at this and say, hang on a second, this is interesting. This is really high quality. This is something that's worth arguing with. And so we're kind of trying to hit the high end of the snootier end of the book market, in a sense. Because there's, self-publishing, thank God, is very easy. I've done it myself. My book, What is the Trinity? It's great. It's hard to do it, really, really well, but it kind of equalizes, it levels the playing field and, removes barriers to entry. And yet the more educated you are, the more snooty you are about what sort of things you'll take seriously. And when you see a book is self-published, I've had PhDs in philosophy who specialize in philosophy of religion look at my What is the Trinity book, and they're like, yeah, this is really good. Like, everybody should look at this, even if you're not a Unitarian. What he does here is it's very helpful. But that's unusual, right? Most of them, hey, this isn't published by Oxford University Press. Most good philosophy books are. Why would I care about this mangy self-published book? So that's what we're trying to do. Kegan and I spent, a lot, parts of a year, I guess, maybe about a year off and on, working on the Emlin book. And
it was already written.
Yeah, but we had to modernize it, do all the research to add all those footnotes. And then we had to come up with a contemporary house style for Theophilus Press that would be as good looking as a book published by, say, Oxford University Press. And, editing is really hard. My hat's off to editors, because to get a book 99.9% typo free, just that is super hard. But to also have it laid out, according to modern standards, we're basically going with contemporary North American standards as embodied in the Chicago Manual of Style. But still, there's a lot of decisions to make. Anyway, that's what we're trying to do. Our books aren't for everybody, but we are trying to go after a segment of the book buying and reading market that we haven't, as American Unitarian Christians, really cracked into that much yet. So
Very good. Very
the
good.
next thing we have up, we're really excited about. We really think it's an important monograph. It's about the ancient mainstream Christians that historians in modern times call dynamic monarchians, and which are basically now what we call biblical Unitarians. So these are people who are accused in ancient times of saying that Jesus is a mere man, who didn't exist before his miraculous conception. And why this is such an amazing book is all the material written by these Christians, some of whom were fairly learned people, and were very careful about biblical interpretation and even doing some critical study to find out exactly what the correct biblical text was. All of these amazing works have been lost. And so what we have are just a handful of hostile discussions by usually logos theorists, people like Hippolytus, and Origen, Tertullian, and people in that era. And it's really hard to figure out what these Christians were really up to. But basically, they were mainstream Christians who accepted the same books of the Bible as other Christians did. And yet they didn't believe that Jesus is God or that he has a divine nature in that sense. And they didn't even believe in pre-existence in most cases. But it takes a PhD who has studied with a famous church historian like Thomas Gaston, the author. It takes someone with that level of skills to write a book on such a hard historical subject as this. And so we're really excited about it. It's a scholarly monograph. We think it'll take the wind out of the sails of apologists and other theologians and scholars who say, come on, guys, whoever in the history of the church ever held anything like this? Gaston very carefully lays out a case that this view was early and widespread, and indeed maybe even the earliest Christology that mainstream Christians held, which is what we are told some of these ancient dynamic monarchians said. They said that the Logos theory interpretation, where God creates the world through Jesus, this is how people usually read John 1, sort of. They said, hey, that's a new thing. Or these modalists who collapse God and Jesus, that's a new thing. No, I mean, the one God is the Father. Jesus is a man in whom the Word of God dwelled and who was empowered by God to do all the amazing things that he did. So we're really, really excited about that book. It's a lot of work because it's based on hundreds of sources, whether contemporary or ancient, and deals with, what Bible texts were they primarily basing their case on? How did they look at the fourth gospel? And lots of interesting things like that. So that'll be our second book.
Do you think that'll be out next year?
We're hoping and praying we can get it out by the end of 2021, but we'll see.
Oh, this year?
Yeah, we'll see.
Wow.
After the conference, we're going to see if we can finish it.
That's optimistic.
Yeah, it is. But with the Emlin book, we found we had to read several more drafts than we were planning on to get all of the bugs out of it. And we probably didn't get 100%, but we came very close. And a bigger, more complicated book like that will be more difficult. But yeah, we're really looking forward to that.
And let me ask you this: as far as other people, other authors that would like to be published by Theophilus Press, do you have any way for them to get in touch, or is it? Do you accept submissions, or are you content to just figure out who should be the authors in the future, and then reach out to them directly?
There is an email, I believe, and maybe a contact form too on the Theophilus Press website, so people can contact us like that. We're open to submissions, but I would caution people that, for one thing, this is a very small volunteer effort, and we can't publish much just based on the manpower we have now. And for another thing, a lot of just people who will write books on this, who will write whistleblower books in particular, they're not aiming at the same market that we're kind of focusing on. So self-publishing might be better, or some of the other uh, Unitarian groups out there that are publishing books might be a better fit.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't make a promise that we will quickly read submissions and things like that.
Uh-huh.
We'll probably have a third one in the queue, which will be some of my previously unpublished essays and presentations. And after that, we don't know what we're going to do. But now you're probably talking deep into next year.
Right.
If we ever get more manpower, maybe we can do more. But right now, it's just a 3-member publishing committee of the UCA.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go back to talking about the conference. The conference is about a month away, less than a month now.
Yep.
We've got nearly 100 people signed up and room for some more people to come. And let's talk about why someone should come to the UCA conference. What are they going to get out of it?
I've always been a humongous fan of conferences. I've gone to philosophy conferences and theology conferences, and I am always excited to meet people. And in the way that we laid out this conference, we've left ample time for people to talk and get to know one another. So we've got two hours scheduled for the lunches and dinner times, and some break times in between the sessions. We tried not to overschedule everything, so you're just running around all the time. We want you to sit with different people every meal and just, hear some of their story and, make some connections and some friendships, or renew older friendships. A lot of people I know are going to show up and be extremely excited to meet Mark Cain.
Oh, yeah.
Who wouldn't be? And also his guests, these people who we've heard their stories and are so, interested in them now. And so kind of grateful for their testimony. I'm looking forward to meeting some of these people that I haven't met. So meeting people is a big part of it. Another part that I mentioned is just sort of finding out what some other Unitarian groups are doing. Is there something I might want to be involved in? Is there something I need to be able to tell people about? Something I should add to my schedule? And maybe I want to talk about some of these differences with them in a friendly manner while scarfing down a burger or at lunch, or it's all good. And it's a different crowd than you're gonna find elsewhere. And then obviously part of the appeal is the presentations, and we're really excited about the presentations. We think that it's really going to be valuable content in terms of understanding the Bible, the history of Christian theology, and just kind of Unitarian theology and Christology. So we have Dr. Stephen Snobelin from Canada, from University of King's College in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And he's going to be telling us about a really interesting early modern era whistleblower named Paul Best, who was also thrown in jail, like Thomas Emlyn, for being a blasphemer or a heretic. We have Kegan Chandler, who a lot of people know him from his blog and his excellent books, The God of Jesus and Constantine and the Divine Mind. And he's going to be talking about this idea of early high Christology, which is all the rage in New Testament studies, and sort of, asking some critical questions about that, basically. Pastor Sean Finnegan, the one, the only, is going to be presenting. And your topic is slipping my mind right now.
Subordinationism.
Historical mainly, or both
Biblical.
Historical and contemporary?
Yeah. Primarily just the biblical case for the subordination of the Son to the Father, and dealing with the theological implications of that biblical evidence. So I'm going to be interacting with scholarship that would want to affirm the Trinity and the eternal subordination of the Father and the Son at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
and basically in an effort to show that that is not a a possible landing place, to affirm the Trinity and subordination, I think is highly problematic. I think as soon as you recognize subordination, you don't have um, you don't have a full blown Trinity theory anymore. At least
Mm-hmm.
not the way that they're doing it.
Yeah. And just waving your hands and intoning the phrase functional subordination isn't enough.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Sounds
Yeah.
good.
So
Yeah,
I'm
we
dealing
have
with the economic
mhm,
Trinity versus the immanent Trinity, and
mhm,
how, the incarnation theory of, oh, well, he's just, the son is just subordinate, uh, qua, human nature during his incarnation. But before that, they were co equal. And after that, they're co equal. This whole like, sort of like, toned down kenosis theory that still lingers on among Trinitarian authors. So I'm going to be interacting with that. I mean, my case is primarily, or I don't want to say primarily. Well, it's first of all, it's biblical, and then secondarily, it's logical, looking at the theology and how that works out, how to synthesize the biblical data in a
mhm,
way that makes sense. So that's
mhm,
kind of where I'm
mhm.
headed.
Excellent. Yeah, no, that sounds like you're breaking some new ground there. That's really going to be worthwhile. Another speaker is the amazing Patrick Navas, who lives in Southern California, and he wrote a really superior whistleblower book called Divine Truth or Human Tradition. I think when he wrote it, he wasn't too sure about what he thought about the pre-existence issue. And he's going to be talking about, the kind of Unitarians who believe in the pre-existence of Christ and those who are dead against that, like myself. And, is this a difference that we can tolerate? That's kind of his topic. Then we have Bill Schlegel, who formerly was a instructor at the Israel extension of the Masters University, founded by John MacArthur, and author of the Satellite Bible Atlas and host of the One God Report podcast. He's going to have a new presentation for us. Dr. Jerry Weirwill, who works with Spirit and Truth and as one of the editors of the Revised English version. The Revised English version, this really neat Unitarian version with a lot of commentary in the notes. So he'll be presenting as well. And then I will be giving a big presentation on the opening night too. So that's our lineup. We think it's really worthwhile.
Very good. And could you just share a little bit about your presentation? I know you're going to be tackling John 1.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to be talking about? What do you hope to contribute on that discussion? I mean, if there's one passage that's been discussed ad nauseum, it's John 1. What do you have to say to us?
Yeah, John 1 is probably the jewel in what I call, it's the crown jewel in the canon within the canon, this little handful of text you're supposed to appeal to, which just obviously require Trinity and incarnation. This is the absolute number one favorite text. Every Unitarian Christian ever, I think, has been immediately confronted with, well, what about John 1?
Mm-hmm.
Because people think it's just this home run, basically for the Trinity side or the deity of Christ side. And I think that's really quite upside down. So my presentation will be called What John 1 Meant, as in, what could this have meant to the author and to his original audience? If you look in very learned commentaries today, people just cannot get over thinking that this is a wonderful anticipation of the idea of, two who are fully divine and basically two persons within the one true God. But these are later ideas. So what would somebody in the year 90 have thought that all of this meant?
Mm-hmm.
And the only way that you can figure out how they would have taken it is not by looking at Athanasius or, the Creed from Constantinople in 381 or something that Augustine wrote. You have to look at what came before. What was it that they would have been reading, which would have made this whole prologue intelligible to them? And I think there's a whole large range of recent scholarship which is talking about wisdom literature and personifications of divine wisdom, which really illuminates the whole thing. And so I will talk about difficulties for Trinitarian and other sorts of readings of this text. But the main thing I want to do is to lay out what it meant in light of earlier writings. And it seems to me that most or all of the ideas or the themes that are in the prologue actually have earlier precedent. And so they could have pieced it together. It would flow in a way that made sense to them. And, just very briefly, it's about God's eternal word by which he made all things. This is what's kind of expressed to the highest extent in the man Jesus. I think that's what it means when it says the word became flesh. And there's even precedent in earlier wisdom literature for what you could call a non-literal incarnation, where God's eternal wisdom comes down and becomes embooked in the Torah. Not literally. I mean, God's wisdom didn't take on, parchment.
Yeah.
Didn't hypostatically unite itself to a parchment with ink on it. But it's a non-literal coming. So I'm trying to show the logic of the passage, how it flows, and what it could have meant to the original readers in light of earlier writings, both in the Bible and between the Old and New Testaments.
Yeah, what I like so much about that approach is that it really does the opposite of what we've seen so much. Over and over, we're told what John 1 isn't saying. Oh, it's not saying the Trinity. It's not saying that Jesus is deity. It's not saying pre-existence, etc. But what Unitarians fail to do so often is to say, well, what is it saying? You have to give a positive understanding, not just a negative. So I really like that you're going to be doing that and exploring that.
Yeah, and I probably won't get into the history much, but the history is really illuminating on this. Maybe another time I'll go more into that, because if you're going to tell me that this book is obviously about a multi-personal God, or sorry, this passage is obviously about a multi-personal God, if that were obvious, you would see that from the earliest times. Obvious implications are drawn immediately by competent readers. Okay, but you don't see that. What you see instead are Logos theorists in the late 100s and into the 200s and on, who think that it's about God and also this lesser God, this lesser divine being. So there's those guys. Some people thought that. Some people thought it was collapsing the Father and Son. So it says the Word was God. They think it means the Son was the Father. You got a Son Father. They're the ancient modalists. Some people thought that. That's crazy, but people have been confusing God and Jesus for a long time. Mm-hmm. But then we know there were people like the dynamic monarchians who I mentioned before, who accepted John and who just thought that the Word was not a being in addition to God. It's something more akin to God's wisdom or God's spirit, and something which God can put in a man, and something by which God can act in creation. But it's not, it's neither God himself exactly, nor is it a different divine being. It's just basically a personification of a divine attribute. Yeah. So we know this. So the idea that this is somehow obviously a Trinitarian proof, it's upside down. It disregards the history. I guess why people think it is because if you crack open a study Bible or most learned commentaries, they do not care to go into the history of interpretations.
Right.
And it's not just ancient, it's modern as well. Sir Isaac Newton had a friend who basically came to the same conclusion about John 1. The English Unitarian Theophilus Lindsay had a view of John 1 that's very similar to mine. Some early American Unitarians had views that are very, very similar. It's occurred to all kinds of people, even the famous contemporary scholar of the Jewish Bible. When he looks at the prologue, he's like, yeah, I don't know about this incarnation thing in verse 14, but at least up until then, like this is something that any Jew could have agreed with in that time.
Very good.
Really? Yeah, I think he's right about that, actually.
Hmm.
So you can read it as consistent with the other three gospels, and that's pretty important, I think.
Yeah. Very good. So if somebody wants to watch or listen to this presentation of yours or the others that you mentioned, they can come to the conference in October. You can sign up at Unitarian Christian Alliance.org, O-R-G, and there are still spots available, but it's not going to be available live webcast.
That's right.
I know we do have plans to put these things out later in the year once they're professionally edited. And so either come to the conference or you're just going to have to wait, right? I mean, that's pretty much what we decided for all this.
That's right. Yeah, the board of the UCA decided that a good strategy would be to release the conference presentations over the course of the year and to really spend the time and money it takes to make them look, television quality, basically.
Yeah.
So that these will be something that will serve people for a long time. So we're not doing live streaming, and hopefully we'll get more people out next time. But you're really going to like this stuff when you see it, because people are really bringing their A game to this.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I was planning on bringing my B game, but now that you said that, I'm gonna take it up a notch. But
not even
all
your
right.
A- game, Finnegan.
Yeah.
Got to be the A or the A+.
Got to be A or A+. I don't know if I can guarantee an A+, but I'll do my best. So I think that's about all we have time for today. Just by way of closing, is there anything else you'd like to share? Maybe talk about your website, your podcast, where people can follow you.
What I've been working on the last couple of months is a podcast. I think it will have just come out when you release this episode. Trinity's podcast 334. Who do you say I am? And this is yet another approach to the New Testament that absolutely cannot be accused of assuming Unitarianism. So it just says, what would you expect if they thought Jesus was God only? What would you think if they thought he was man only? And what would you expect to find in the New Testament if they thought that he's a God man? And you're comparing those three competing hypotheses with what you actually see and don't see in the New Testament. And I think it's a really powerful argument for a Unitarian view of Jesus. So I'm excited about that. I worked really hard on it. It's also a video on 21st Century Reformation online, 21stcr.org.
Right. And people can follow you at trinities.org. And your website is called Trinities instead of Trinity, probably because Trinity was already taken, but also because there are many different theories of the Trinity. There's not one obvious or clear way of thinking about what the Trinity is, right?
Yeah. So also I'm annoying people on Instagram and TikTok these days. So yeah, there will be no twerking involved. But if you want to see me giving little 30-second lectures on the Bible and the history of Christian theology, you can look for me on those.
Yeah, I think half the audience right there was just like, oh, and the other half is like, thank God, I don't want to see Dale twerk.
No, you don't want to see me dancing in any form.
So yeah, you can follow Dale on Instagram, TikTok, but your bread and butter is Twitter, right? What's your username for Twitter?
I think it's just at Dale Tuggy.
Okay, Dale Tuggy.
Yeah, and, I guess I prefer Twitter to the other social media. It's good for opinionated people who can compose short sentences.
Yeah, you're a power user on Twitter for sure. And you've got the YouTube Trinities and the podcast. You can find that in Apple Podcasts or in Spotify or whatever you use. And so thanks so much for talking with me today, Dale. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Sean. Keep up the great work. Love Restitutio.